Hey Peyton, nice to see you again on this beautiful day. And this time we have a quote by Ray Dalio again, where he says, "It is a fundamental law of nature that in order to gain strength, one has to push one's limits, which is painful." How painful can it be, Peyton? How painful can it be?
I'm on a quest to find out, brother. Yes, this is true. And it's helpful to remember this, honestly, because growth is something that many of us asked for in the first place. Many of us sought out as a high good in the first place. And growth is something that always comes with a price. Always comes with a price that must be paid by the grower.
Mm.
And it comes in the form of challenge, struggle, triumph, or trials, I mean maybe triumph, sometimes not triumph, but certainly pain, certainly difficulty, certainly discomfort. And what's helpful to remember, especially for those of us that are on the front half of their journey, or at least likely on the front half of their journey here on Earth, is that oftentimes the strength lasts longer than the difficulty and than the pain. I can see looking around at mentors and people that I respect or people that I run into or whatever that many of the strongest people I know are past the periods that formed them. They're past their own crucible. But you can tell in their way of being, in their spirit, in their resilience, and in their poise that they had their own crucible. And now the growth from this they carry with them for all of the other things that they go through, even when they're no longer in the storms of their life. It's like a tree that is blown in heavy winds and storms. It becomes stronger and stronger and more resilient through it. And yet, in the daylight, when the clouds pass, the tree retains its strength. How do you think about these storms that we may find ourselves within on our journey? What does it feel like? Why is it that these two things of pain and growth must go hand in hand?
Why do they go hand in hand? I think because it's an inherent feature of life and evolution, which means it is not optimizing for the individual's wealth and well-being, it is optimizing for the whole system, for the whole of nature, to find some homeostasis in this, actually in this vastness of our space. Like, even that we are on a floating space rock where there's an atmosphere, where there's water and conditions which enable life, means that there's all already something very narrow which came out of something so seemingly inevitable cold. But we are in a world with fluid water where it's above freezing temperatures, and so we can find a way to live as beings and survive and so on. So this inherentness of it is highly unlikely to survive, but there are some tiny gaps where the seemingly impossible can happen, but these gaps come also with their price, because they are made out of conditions which are very fragile, which may be very volatile at times, and therefore it's a thing to be cherished. So why do they go hand in hand? Just because it's so unlikely that life happens in itself. And that's why there's also this traversing of potential areas where the conditions are met that life can happen. It is the Goldilocks conditions for us, and sometimes we are on our way to the Goldilocks conditions. The same is with flow. Flow seemingly is hard to reach, but when you're in it, it's just awesome to work with it. And therefore, our quest in that regard is to find the right conditions and to create the right conditions and to have judgment over which conditions to avoid and where, when the storm is coming, to take shelter. Because 2 days ago, a storm swept over Lucerne and took some trees, even seemingly very strong trees with him. And there we see, out of everything, we cannot control anything, but we can control how deep we dig the tunnel where we take shelter in ourselves, maybe. We can control not to be exposed to the violent winds and to the likelihood of being crushed by a tree. We can control where we go after the storm, how we clean up and how we accept it. Or we can ourselves rage against the storm, but it doesn't do nothing. So these things go hand in hand because life inherently is beautiful but not easy. Beautiful but worth it.
Hmm,
How do
hmm.
you see it, Peyton?
I'm reminded that there is within us this deep-seated capacity for endurance that is woven throughout every cell of our body. Each of us comes from an unbroken line of survival, at least up to the point of reproduction, since the first cell that ever existed billions of years ago. Every single generation, from single celled organisms through all of the various stages of development, through all of the mass extinction events that have happened throughout the history of our planet, have survived every single phase and made it on and managed to survive and to endure and to pass along to the very point where we're at now. And so, this capacity for survival, this capacity for keeping on going, this capacity for continuing to move with whatever storms arise, this is something that we can trust is within us. This is something we can trust is a resource that we all carry. It is intrinsic to the life force that we have. It is intrinsic to our breath in some ways, and it can catch us when we can't catch ourselves, I find. What do you think about the ends of growth? We talk a lot about why we want to grow. We talk a lot about why growth can even bring meaning to the difficulties, to the pain. Growth can even make something that would otherwise be totally harrowing and terrible worth it in the long run, even if it's hard to connect with that in certain moments. But why? What is it that makes growth an end in itself? Or is it an end in itself? Or is it just another means to yet more ends? How do you think about the fruit on the tree?
From what I see, is that life is longing and reaching for itself. And in order to do that, you correctly pointed out, it has to live. It needs survival in order to thrive. And life longing for itself, meaning reproduction, meaning transformation, meaning the creation of something out of something else, but in a way which gives you structure, which gives you nutrition, which lets you take what is already there, the sunlight in an example for trees, and transform it into matter and stored energy for someone else to have their way with it and to be part of a cycle of life. So this life which is longing for itself is something amazing which happens to parents giving birth to their children. They come from their parents, but they do not belong to them, yet they live on through them. And even like you pointed out, the DNA of our ancestors lives through us. And I recently learned that our mitochondria, our energy creation facilities, our power plants of the cells, they are solely from our mothers.
Yes.
So it is the feminine strand and DNA line which comes through our mothers. Our mothers give ourselves energy, and I find that kind of poetic to look at. So,
Hmm, hmm,
what do you think about why do we look for meaning? How can we find the meaning in growth and in pain?
mm, mhm. Well, one quick aside about mitochondria, I'm 51% sure that the great filter behind the Fermi paradox has to do with us transitioning from purely prokaryotic life to eukaryotic life. If I look at the timelines, I'm at least 51% convinced of this hypothesis. But in terms of why do we look for meaning, this is an interesting question. I think there's multiple contradictory and yet true on their own level ways to think about meaning or ultimate meaning. I think there's one sense in which our whole fleeting being as organisms is so fleeting. It's so ephemeral, and ultimately there is nothing that we can hold on to. There is no legacy that will actually last. There is no building that will actually withstand the test of time. There is no invention that will alter the ultimate path of the universe. There is no, or at least on a universal scale. And in the end, maybe searching for meaning can accidentally divide us from the encounter with meaning. Or in other words, thinking about these things in language and words may cut us off from the true giving ourselves to meaning that is direct, meaning that we can drink, or a stream that we can enter but not carry with us. There is a there is a valid case to be made that the search for meaning is a psychological problem that people say it looks like a philosophical one. But yet, on the other hand, we are storytelling creatures. And these stories do actually change our direct experience. And these stories are something that actually is a filter through our reality. And these searches for meaning is oftentimes what can enable us to have this greater capacity for endurance and this broader context in which to put our present experience. And this is especially useful and helpful in moments of pain or difficulty when we must step beyond the level that we're capable of and grow into a new level to meet the moment. And this is how, in my experience, growth often works. It's we're thrust into some situation that we don't have the full capacity for yet. And in order to meet the situation, in order to experience and to move with the way that we are called to move, we must expand to a new level. We must grow to a new level in order to handle whatever it is that's now on our plate that we couldn't have handled 6 months ago. There's this progressive overload nature to many of our journeys of growth that is kind of similar to the gym. For a while, I was working out and I was doing kind of the same weights, and I had a habit of doing the same weights. And once I started taking notes and trying to do one more rep or 5 more pounds every workout, that's when I really started to grow because I was pushing to a new level, slightly new level, what I couldn't have done a month ago, this kind of thing. And our spiritual growth, our psychological growth, our growth in courage, our growth in our pain tolerance itself. All of these things seem to have some degree of progressive overload and it seems to be, in my own experience, it seems to be most powerful when we're progressive overloaded, partly against our will from the outside, and we find ourselves thrust into a circumstance we wouldn't have chosen for ourselves. And it forces us to go where we wouldn't have gone. The thing that we most need to find is hidden in the place where we last want to look oftentimes on our journey. And this is something that I've been, in big picture context, fortunate to encounter in many areas of my life, even if I forget that it's good fortune, perhaps, in the end. How do you think about this progressive overload, or what would you add to this question of meaning as it relates to this context of pain and growth?
Meaning is something we create for ourselves, like you said, looking back and telling ourselves a story which is meaningful in terms of that we can grow from it if we choose to do so. If we commit to a path of progressive overload and bearing the load which life gives us and progressively challenges us to a bigger level. And this story is something we can craft consciously, or we can like be fearful of if we go to it from a different place. So it's always important in what kind of place of mind you are in when you tell yourself the story of what it means, whatever happened, something good or something bad, in a mind in its place where it's high agency mode, where it's choosing life. It is saying that you can grow from it. And the other way around is sadly also true, that purely through your mind and through your attention and through your interpretation of things, you can give something a meaning which is far worse than by itself it should had. So we have a tool at hand which also can be a terrible master here.
Mm, mm,
But yeah, progressive overload is a concept which is very important when we want to bear bigger weights. And it is the simplest thing to accept if this load is unbearable, because then we have to outgrow ourselves. Maybe we have like take a cut, or maybe we hurt ourselves. That also may happen, or maybe we will be crushed by it. Who knows? So sometimes we are not able to choose the load which we have to bear, which life gives us sometimes. But when we are lucky and we can bear it barely, then there's this overcompensation mechanism, which happens psychologically, which happens physically. And when we find a good time to rest, actually grow into a strength and capability where we next time can bear an even bigger load. And I find that very beautiful. This is also a way where some people say that you can simulate the evolutionary process with it. You have stressors, and then you have overcompensation towards these stressors, and then you have at the end systems which are more resilient next time, being able to bear a bigger load like a tree which survives a storm, growing its roots deeper into the ground if the tree can.
And it stands out to me that the physical metaphor may carry over in the sense of recovery too. It is not in the actual workout, in the tearing of our muscles, that our muscles ultimately grow. It is in the fueling and resting of those muscles afterwards that the muscles generate new and more cells that they had than they had before. And so I think in times of the most struggle, when we're stretched beyond our limits, when we are called to grow, I think taking recovery very seriously. And perhaps in some phases, in my own experience, it is almost as if every hour of the day must be dedicated that is not working and in the actual storm itself must or should be mostly dedicated to active recovery, to restoring our hearts and our minds and our bodies and our strength, to good sleep and walks and journaling and meditation and prayer and rest. I think this is an essential strategy or an essential intentionality of this path. I have no more thoughts except some intentions, but I will share real quick a poem that I'm inspired to read. Open to the one, unfolding now. What comes has come and will flow through, immutable. Align with the one that invites me to join and be danced by the life that flows throughout. Trust in the one where I always return, to drink from the stream and be healed by the water. Rest in the one. Let go of the struggling, breathe in the wind, and connect to it all. And this is kind of my intention, I guess, in terms of the whole storms and movements, strength, growing, pain, recovery, all of this, is to align myself with this whole reality, align myself with all that arises, the pleasant, the unpleasant, the difficult, and the things that are helped by a broader context to put the days within. I think
Mhm.
the capacity for endurance oftentimes comes to our own stories and our own perspective in which all these things are arising. And so my hope and prayer is to carry some wisdom and to find that flow to be breathed by that breath in this week ahead. How about you, man? What are your intentions out of all this?
Wonderful poem you shared. And I also believe that's the secret. You can find peace of mind in the midst of the storm. You can do that. But we are not evolved like that. Our minds will replicate and try to resist the storm. But if we find a way to breathe in and breathe out the winds and the seas and the lakes, we can find a peace in the storm. Yeah. My intention for this week is to create the conditions for flow very consciously, to prepare for it in the morning and then breathe it during the day. This is
That will
my
serve you
intention.
well, my friend. Very good intention. I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
conversation. Really enjoyed it as always. I will talk to you in the next one, brother.
Likewise. Bye, Peyton. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.